Tonight, we focus on a confrontation that could reshape the economic lives of millions of people across North America. At dawn this morning, the White House, led by Donald Trump, presented Canada with a stark choice: accept new trade terms within 72 hours or face sweeping new tariffs. The message was direct. The clock was already running. The document released by the White House used measured language. It described the proposal as a framework for a modernized bilateral trade relationship. The wording sounded neutral, but the substance behind it was anything but. In practical terms, the United States laid out 4 conditions. Each of them required Canada to surrender something significant before negotiations could even begin. From Ottawa's perspective, these were not invitations to talk. They were demands. First, Washington asked Canada to immediately remove all retaliatory tariffs currently imposed on American goods, not as part of a negotiated compromise. Not as a gesture made during talks, but as a precondition for talks themselves. Canada would have to dismantle its entire package of countermeasures before the first official meeting even took place. Second, the United States demanded binding pricing commitments on Canadian energy exports. That included crude oil, natural gas, and electricity. The wording suggested fixed or controlled pricing structures. Canadian officials quickly pointed out what that would mean in practice. It would place foreign limits on how Canada sells and prices its own natural resources. Third, Washington proposed permanent tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum exports. The rates would be lower than some earlier tariffs, but the key word was permanent. Those barriers would become a lasting feature of trade between the two countries. Fourth, the United States demanded that Canada immediately align its agricultural and food safety regulations with American standards and say, not gradual coordination, not a negotiated transition. A complete adoption of U.S. rules as the baseline for Canadian law. Taken together, these conditions would dramatically reshape how trade works between the two countries. They were not minor adjustments. They were structural changes with long-term consequences. Inside the White House, the move was framed as bold leadership. Officials argued that the proposal would produce a fairer trade relationship and protect American workers. The language was designed to sound cooperative and forward-looking, but the demands themselves were immediate and far-reaching. Ottawa's response came quickly. At a packed press conference, the answer arrived in less than 3 minutes. It was brief. It was calm, and it was unmistakable. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped to the podium. He spoke only a few sentences. He explained that Canada would not surrender control over its laws or its resources simply to begin negotiations. He rejected the idea of foreign governments dictating the price of Canadian energy. Then he stepped away from the microphone. No follow-up questions. No extended explanation. Just a firm refusal. That moment shifted the tone of the confrontation. The message was simple. Canada would not trade away sovereignty as the price of negotiation. The line was clear, and once drawn, it created political consequences. Any Canadian leader who later accepted those terms would face enormous domestic backlash. Washington responded almost immediately. President Trump called Canada's refusal a major mistake. White House officials described the response as ungrateful. The public tone from Washington was sharp and confrontational. Behind the scenes, however, the reaction was more complicated. Several Republican senators and state governors began raising concerns. They worried about the impact of a prolonged trade conflict on industries in their states, energy producers, manufacturers. Those voices carry influence in any trade dispute that threatens prices at the pump or food costs at the grocery store. Financial markets reacted the same day. Traders interpreted Canada's response as a signal that Ottawa intended to stand firm. Investors adjusted their positions accordingly. Energy companies saw immediate pressure. Agricultural markets began pricing in the possibility of supply disruptions. Capital flowed towards safer assets as traders prepared for the possibility of a prolonged standoff. At the heart of the dispute lies a basic assumption. The White House appears to believe that access to the American market is so essential that Canada will eventually yield to American demands. In some cases, that assumption holds true, but Canada's situation is different. The two economies are deeply intertwined. Trade flows heavily in both directions. Canada exports vast quantities of goods to the United States. But the United States also relies heavily on Canadian oil, natural gas, electricity, automotive components, agricultural products, and industrial materials. Factories on both sides of the border depend on parts that cross the border multiple times during production. Farmers and food processors rely on cross-border markets, interrupt those flows, and both countries feel the consequences. Mark Carney and his advisors appear to have calculated exactly that. Their response was not simply a rejection, it was a strategic maneuver. By refusing immediately and publicly, Ottawa forced Washington into a difficult position. The United States must now decide whether to escalate rapidly or pursue a slower, more complex negotiation. Either path carries risks. For ordinary people, the consequences could be significant. Three possible scenarios are now emerging. Scenario one, political pressure grows inside the United States from senators and governors worried about economic damage. The White House softens its position. Some demands are removed. Negotiations begin without strict preconditions. A smaller compromise agreement eventually emerges. Markets stabilize. Both sides claim partial victory. Consumers feel relief. Scenario two, neither side backs down. The 72-hour deadline expires without agreement. Tariffs take effect. Canada retaliates. Cross-border supply chains begin to suffer. Factories slow production. Delivery times increase. Fuel and grocery prices rise. Political pressure builds in both countries. Negotiations eventually restart, but only after economic damage has already been done. Scenario three, Canada holds its position. Other countries watching the dispute take notice. Allies begin reducing their dependence on American markets. Canada accelerates trade partnerships elsewhere. Over time, global trade patterns slowly shift. The United States loses some of the leverage it has historically relied on. The change would not happen overnight, but it could permanently alter how countries respond to American economic pressure. All three outcomes remain possible. The next few days will determine which path begins to unfold. For now, the decision rests with leaders in Washington and Ottawa, and with lawmakers who must consider the impact on their own constituents. For everyday households, the stakes are immediate. Expanded tariffs could push up gasoline prices. Heating costs could rise during colder months. Food prices could climb if supply chains become more expensive or markets close. The effects could reach wallets quickly. Businesses will adapt. Some companies will reorganize supply chains. Others will seek new markets. Those adjustments take time and money. Small businesses often feel the pressure first. They have fewer resources to absorb sudden cost increases. Workers in affected sectors will watch developments closely: automotive manufacturing, steel production, agriculture, energy. Jobs in those industries could shift if trade barriers become long-term realities. Governments on both sides may introduce financial support programs for affected regions, but such programs take time to implement. Diplomacy will continue behind the scenes. Trade lawyers and negotiators are already studying treaty obligations and legal pathways. They will prepare detailed response strategies. Public opinion will also shape the outcome. Leaders facing elections will weigh local economic impacts carefully. Governors and senators feeling pressure from voters may push their governments toward compromise. History shows that domestic pressure can shift national policy quickly. For now, the public record is clear. The White House issued a framework outlining its demands. Canada responded swiftly and rejected the conditions. That exchange is now part of the official record, and it will influence every negotiation that follows. Moments like this often test political strategy. One side may rely on speed and shock. The other may rely on patience and economic resilience. Which strategy succeeds depends on who can withstand pressure longer. Canada also retains options beyond the immediate dispute. It can expand trade partnerships in Europe. It can deepen economic ties in Asia. It can negotiate new agreements with emerging markets. And those alternatives may become increasingly important depending on how the next 72 hours unfold. Those kinds of moves, new trade routes, new partnerships, new supply chains, do not happen overnight. They take months, sometimes years, but over time they gradually shift the balance of power. The United States faces limits as well. Even the world's largest economy feels the consequences when supply chains break or prices spike. When gasoline becomes more expensive or food costs rise, voters notice immediately. That creates political pressure for leaders who choose aggressive trade strategies. Those realities shape decision-making, even when governments try to project strength. Tonight, analysts on both sides of the border are studying every detail of what was said at those press conferences. The timing, the tone, the specific wording, that level of analysis matters. In high-stakes diplomacy, a single sentence can close doors or narrow future options. A brief public refusal can bind governments more tightly than any private negotiation ever could. And that is the strategic core of what we witnessed today. A short, direct refusal delivered in public can reshape the entire negotiating environment. It can make compromise politically harder later. It can rally domestic opinion behind one position, or it can strengthen the resolve of the opposing side. That is the raw power of public statements in high-pressure diplomacy. In the coming hours and days, observers will be watching several signals closely. Headlines will change quickly. Private phone calls between officials in Washington and Ottawa will intensify. Financial markets will respond to every new statement. Analysts will also track practical indicators: shipments crossing the border, statements from energy executives, reactions from agriculture leaders. Each signal will help reveal which direction this dispute is moving. For anyone trying to understand the situation quickly, the essential facts are straightforward. The confrontation began with a demand for rapid structural changes in the trade relationship. Canada responded almost immediately and refused to surrender core policy control. The result is uncertainty. The next 48 hours could determine whether tensions cool or escalate. This story matters not simply because it involves political tension. It tests a deeper question about power in the global economy. Does sheer economic size determine outcomes? Or do mutual dependence and political consequences matter just as much? The answer will influence decisions by governments, businesses, and investors for years to come. If you care about energy prices, job stability, or the rules that govern international trade, this is a moment worth watching closely. Government decisions made over the next few days could affect monthly household bills, employment in local industries, and the shipping routes that connect towns and ports across the continent. We will continue following those developments carefully. Lawmakers in both capitals will remain busy. Corporate leaders will revise their plans. Trade specialists will analyze every new proposal, and ordinary citizens will be watching something very simple: the price displayed at the gas pump. For now, Ottawa's message was direct. Do not ask a country to surrender control of its policies before negotiations even begin. That was the line Canada drew. That was the answer delivered today, and it has already changed the terrain of this dispute. Let us examine the energy dimension more closely. Canada supplies a significant portion of the oil and natural gas used in the United States. Many American refineries are designed specifically to process Canadian crude. If tariffs or restrictions affect that trade, fuel prices could rise quickly. Higher costs at refineries often translate into higher prices for consumers. Heating bills could rise as well, especially in colder regions that depend heavily on imported energy. Energy companies also plan projects years, even decades, into the future. Pipelines, export terminals, and refineries are massive investments built with long timelines in mind. Trade uncertainty can delay those investments. When projects slow, construction pauses, and jobs disappear. Communities that rely on energy sector employment feel those shifts immediately. Now consider the automotive industry. Modern vehicles are built through deeply integrated supply chains that span both countries. During production, a single car can cross the U.S.-Canada border multiple times as different components are installed. Tariffs on parts disrupt that process. Higher component costs can change where factories operate, where parts are sourced, and where jobs are located. Factory towns often feel those changes very quickly. Supply chains also affect smaller businesses. Trucking companies transport parts and finished goods across dozens of border crossings every day. Delays at those crossings raise costs and disrupt delivery schedules. Small delays accumulate over time, turning into significant expenses for businesses that rely on predictable logistics. Agriculture is another critical sector. Canada and the United States trade enormous quantities of grain, meat, dairy products, and processed food every year. Farmers plan production around stable export markets. If market access suddenly changes, demand can fall and prices can drop. Lower farm prices can devastate rural communities. At the same time, higher costs for imported feed, fertilizer, or machinery can add new pressure. Steel and aluminum tariffs create another ripple effect. These metals are not just raw materials, they are essential inputs for cars, construction projects, machinery, and infrastructure. Permanent tariffs introduce uncertainty for manufacturers trying to forecast future costs. Builders, engineers, and contractors then prepare for higher expenses, which can delay construction and raise costs across the economy. Regulatory changes can also be disruptive. If one country is forced to adopt another country's food safety or agricultural standards, companies must redesign labels, update processing equipment, and adjust inspection procedures. Those changes require time and investment. Large corporations may absorb those costs. Small producers often struggle. Legal responses are also possible. Countries involved in trade disputes can file complaints through international trade bodies and arbitration panels. But legal battles take time, often years. Meanwhile, tariffs remain in place and continue affecting businesses and consumers. That is why governments usually prefer negotiation over prolonged legal conflict. Beyond the economic calculations lies political risk. When tariffs drive up the price of gasoline or groceries, public opinion can change rapidly. Voters notice rising costs. Lawmakers representing affected regions feel that pressure immediately. They often push national leaders to reconsider their policies. That pressure can alter the direction of trade policy surprisingly quickly. Many analysts caution that sudden economic shocks are dangerous. Rapid demands create dramatic headlines, but slower negotiation often produces more stable outcomes. Successful leaders try to balance two goals: pushing for change while preserving the systems people rely on every day. That balance becomes harder when governments want to project strength. Tight deadlines create powerful political images. But when two economies are deeply intertwined, political theater can collide with economic reality. Local voices will play a role in what happens next. Chambers of commerce will speak for regional businesses. Small business owners will contact their representatives. Labor unions will advocate for factory workers. Farmers will gather in community meetings to discuss how the dispute affects them. When communities hear that a factory may slow production or a farm may lose access to a market, the reaction can be immediate and intense. For families, the short-term advice is simple: plan carefully, watch fuel and food prices in the coming weeks. If costs begin to rise, small budgeting adjustments can make a difference. Community organizations increase demand during economic disruptions. Local governments typically try to increase support quickly, but assistance programs take time to reach everyone. The next 48 hours will be critical. Negotiations may quietly resume behind the scenes. Lawmakers will demand briefings. The White House may clarify or adjust its demands. Ottawa may begin deeper conversations with partners in Europe or Asia. Financial markets will react to every statement issued by political leaders. Each new development will offer clues about which scenario is becoming most likely. Countries outside North America are also watching closely. If they see a large country using tariffs to pressure a smaller partner, they will take note. Some may begin reducing their exposure to similar risks by strengthening trade ties with alternative partners. Those shifts take time, but they begin with decisions made today. Media coverage will also influence public perception. Quick headlines capture attention, but deeper reporting explains how trade relationships actually function and how policy changes affect local communities. Clear reporting allows citizens and lawmakers to weigh the trade-offs more carefully. We will continue bringing you steady, factual updates as this story develops. For business owners, now is the time to prepare. Review supply chains. Contact suppliers. Explore alternative sourcing options. Consult trade experts and legal advisors. Preparation today can reduce financial damage if tariffs take effect. For workers, staying connected with unions, local officials, and community organizations is important. Many regions activate rapid response programs to support workers when trade disruptions threaten jobs. This is a developing story. The decisions made in the coming days will not only determine trade policy for the near future, they will also influence how countries use economic pressure in conflicts to come. That is why the short public exchange we witness today carries such weight. A single firm reply can reshape negotiations for years. Tonight, we witnessed more than a disagreement between two governments. We witnessed a test of strategy, economics, and political will. Leaders can choose speed or patience, pressure or negotiation. Every choice carries consequences, consequences that will appear in household budgets, job markets, and border crossings across the continent. So pay attention. Watch the markets. Watch the policies. Ask questions of those who represent you, because this is not a distant policy debate. It is a decision that will reach into towns, workplaces, and kitchens across North America. And for now, the key fact remains this: a 72-hour demand met a 3-minute refusal, and the real fight has only just begun. Stay informed.